Joining us now is Femi Falana, SAN. Indeed, since the EndSARS protest began as a youth uprising against police insensitivity and brutality, Nigeria seems to have gone through a negative spiral, which has shaken the very foundations of the country's unity. At a point, those protests were infiltrated by hoodlums, and the upshot was a scaling up of violence across Lagos, the country's commercial nerve center. The rest, they say, is now history. This morning, we have the pleasure of again hosting Femi Falana, senior advocate of Nigeria and human rights activist. We'll try to find out, among other things, what he thinks about President Buhari's response to the crisis, the politicization of the protest, the suspected sponsoring of hoodlums to hijack the protest, and the ensuing breakdown of law and order, first in Lagos and now in an increasing number of states across the Federation. Good morning, Femi Falana, SAN. Thank you for joining us on the morning show. Good morning.
Good morning, Ruben. Morning.
Thank you for joining us. Well, quickly, in the intro, we were expecting that you will comment on the federal government's response to the alleged killings at the Lekki Tollgate Plaza. But again, over the weekend, on October 23 to be specific, the group that you lead, the Alliance Against COVID-19 and the Aftermath, ASCAB, known generally as ASCAB, issued a statement on the situation in the country. And you were very critical of how the federal government has responded. You say that the killings at the Lekki Tollgate, in your view, would seem to be reprehensible, condemnable, unacceptable. But government is insisting that there were really no killings. The governor of Lagos State says, well, one person died, another person suffered gunshot wounds, and at this moment, people have been asked to come forward and confirm. Does ASCAB have another evidence different from that of government to confirm indeed that Nigerians can talk about a Lekki massacre, in quotes?
Well, in the first place, we would like to console, express condolences to the families that lost their loved ones. And we're not talking of protesters alone. We're talking about policemen and soldiers who were killed in the course of duty, as well as other Nigerians, otherwise called hoodlums or miscreants, because they are citizens, But having said that, we have not, ASCAB has not jumped the fray to throw figures, around. But as far as we are concerned, the fact that protesters were shot at, cannot be tolerated in any civilized society. And so, and this is not the first time. And that is the painful aspect of it all. In 1971, when a student, Kunle Adepeju, was shot dead at the University of Ibadan by the police, it led to a crisis all over the place. In 1978, when Akintunde Ojo was shot dead at the University of Lagos by the police, there was a national crisis. Young people, in fact, on that day, Lagos, it was a black night for Lagos. The day the young man was buried. And among the atrocities perpetrated on that day by criminal elements, the then, 5 or 6 story building, customs headquarters in Nigeria, around Ikorodu Road, was not attacked, or not just attacked, was not burned, it was sprayed and sunk by highly placed criminal elements. In 1986, 4 students were killed in ABU. Again, young people all over the country protested. And all of them were always hijacked by criminal elements, so-called hoodlums and the rest of them. But in this particular instance, It's not a matter for a judicial commission of inquiry. The Lagos state government has gone beyond all that, unlike many other states in the country. We have the coroner's inquest law. And what the ASCAP has done is to contact the Honorable Attorney General of Lagos State. Can we activate the provisions of this law to have a scientific examination conducted? Because any unnatural death in Lagos shall be investigated. We know the killers. And of course, it's a very serious, to kill a human being, it's a very serious matter. And so you cannot, no government, no responsible government can deny that people were killed, or when you have not conducted an investigation. And for the Nigerian army, and I'm going to appeal to the authorities, to learn how to manage crisis so that you don't fuel tension in the country. This is not the first time. This is not the first time. In 2015, under the Muhammadu Buhari administration, soldiers killed civilians in Zaria. And what were we told? A traffic offense. He said some people blocked the road. The chief of army staff wanted to pass, through that road. And for that reason, soldiers were asked to kill those who were on the highway. Again, these were Shiites. So people say, the nuisance is too much. Whatever. And 7 people were alleged to have been killed by the army. According to them, according to the authorities, the Shiites wanted to assassinate the chief of army staff, General Tukur Buratai. But what happened at the end of the day? In a commission of inquiry instituted by the Kaduna state government, it emerged that 347 people, mostly women and children, were killed, mowed down. And at the end of the day, no autopsy, no postmortem exercise. Their bodies were buried in an unmarked grave. Up to now, nobody has identified, nobody has exhumed the bodies for proper forensic examination. Nobody has come out to let us know who the family members are or the parents. Nobody has consoled the family member. It does not happen anywhere in the world. That is the highest crime against humanity. So when the Lekki incident happened, I wasn't going to, as Cap just said, there has to be a thorough investigation. And we have begun. We are setting up our own independent panel, having regard to the deniers, oozing out of, the seats of power. We are going to get to the root of the matter. Not just Lekki. We are coming out with facts and figures with respect to the entire killings in the country. But with respect to Lekki, people were shot at. Some of those young men and women have died. The facts will come out. And at that time, and that was why we made the statement, when the international community was being accused of, hasty comments and conclusions. We said, no, we hope the federal government of Nigeria will not be embarrassed colossally at the end of the day, at the end of the investigations. But please, let us insist, and you don't need to go and set up a judicial commission of inquiry. How many dead bodies are in Lagos? If you know other killings in the prisons, in the correctional center, Ikoyi Correctional Center, in Kirikiri Correctional Center, and we must now begin to interrogate. We must begin to ask questions. Why do we keep people in prison for years without trial, and you do not expect them to want to jump out of prison? Why do we send a big man to prison in what they call prison exchange? He doesn't get there. You ask some young men, you get big men and women, they don't get to the prison. You have young men to go and replace them. So please, let us take advantage of this this tragic situation to go back to the drawing table and reorganize our society. You cannot prevent riots, even in the most advanced country. In 2011, you have the Tottenham riots in the UK. There were riots, there was looting. And many cities in the UK. That night, London alone, lost properties worth about 300 million pounds. In the United States, over the protests over the brutal killing of a black man, George Floyd. There were riots in 140 cities in America. Billions of dollars were lost in terms of properties and assets. So you are going to have riots in countries where the rule of law is not allowed to be institutionalized. And that is what is going on. The NSAS campaign was totally unnecessary if the government had taken Nigerian people seriously. There have been complaints over the years of extrajudicial killing, of extortion, of illegal arrest and detention, of criminalization of innocent people. But nobody took the complaints seriously. The instruments of power, statutory bodies, that ought to have taken up these matters are disabled.
Indeed,
and so that is why you have this problem.
Indeed, sir. Martin Luther King did say that a riot was the language of the unheard. And to your point about the Shiites, which I've made repeatedly on this show, I'll quote another Martin, who was a pastor, Niemöller. Well, paraphrase him. First, they came for the Shiites, and I said nothing because I'm not a Shiite. When they came for me, there was nobody left to say anything. So I want you to talk now about this culture that we have seen repeatedly, as you have explained, using thugs, arming thugs for political expediency, which invariably backfires. And you've also talked about your in-depth investigation that you will conduct, because if the argument is about whether anybody died or not, we must agree that it will take a miracle for soldiers to shoot people at close range and all we had was injuries. There must be casualties. So I want to know what chance your fact-finding mission has of actually getting justice when we had the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces who did not even address the fact that a shooting happened at all. What kind of stone wall is that? Does that portend anything sinister for the future? Will there be justice? Will we ever know who gave the order, who those officers were, and exactly how many casualties there were?
Well, let me say that, and I want to believe very seriously, that those who deny ever going there. I mean, and we know that we have already identified the barracks where the soldiers left for Lekki. We've already identified the barracks. But let me just say this. The president, like all of us, the president was likely to have been told. Soldiers were not there. And so that was why I want to believe it was not addressed. And they said it was a rumor. And so the president asked the international community and all friends of Nigeria, don't jump to hasty conclusions. But I think the facts I imagine now that indeed soldiers went to Lekki, indeed they fired at protesters, indeed some of the protesters, at least two have been officially acknowledged to have died from gunshot injuries. And so by yesterday night, the presidency issued a statement that why the president didn't address it in his broadcast was because, the Lagos state government was going to investigate this matter and the federal government will cooperate. Yeah, all right, so okay. But like I said, this is not the first time. But, we have to understand, first of all, when the APC government was in opposition, it filed about 3 cases up to the Court of Appeal, from the High Court to the Court of Appeal, where both the Federal Court and the Court of Appeal held that soldiers in Nigeria have no business to get involved in elections. Last year, the Nigerian Army wanted to subject all Nigerians to what they call identification exercise. Everybody was asked to produce his ID card, a driving license, passport, and so on and so forth. And say, hey, come. Millions of Nigerians do not have any means of identity because of the negligence of the government. So we're going to have a civil war in our hands when soldiers have to go to the troops, to the streets, and be searching everybody. Say, no. I went to court. I went to the Federal Court. What did the army do? What happened? The army organized some lumpen elements in Abuja, sponsored them, to demonstrate against me. It was covered in the media. Oh, Falana, leave the army alone. Stop your problem with the army. What happened? Again, Amnesty International issued a report of extrajudicial killing by the SARS and the army. Detailed names of those who were killed, names of casualties. What happened? The office of Amnesty International was occupied by thugs for weeks. I had to write a letter to the president, pleading, this is an international organization. If you have a problem with their figures, take it up with the management in London. But we cannot allow thugs to seize the office of an international human rights body. Again, shortly thereafter, the thugs were withdrawn. In this particular instance, and I've never seen it anywhere in the world, where in the federal capital of a country, where you have all the embassies, you have unmarked vehicles taking thugs around, and it was being filmed, and the thugs were being ferried by officials of the government. And at the end of the day, we were simply told, it wasn't the State Security Service. In Lagos, it wasn't the Nigerian army that shot. That is such deniers do not portray us as a serious country, because it is the duty of the government anywhere in the world to trace criminals and ensure that they are brought to book, assuming without conceding that the State Security Service was not involved in the show of shame in Abuja. It's not enough to deny. The faces are clear by now. Those guys who set out to put the government in unbelievable embarrassment ought to have been arraigned in court so that the government can distance itself from criminality. But that was not all.
Okay.
Some of the boys who were arrested by the protesters in Abuja, clearly admitted, confessed, that they were giving money at Jabi Market to go and attack protesters. Okay. It was the same thing in Lagos. Okay. In Alausa,
okay, sir.
Some people went there in buses to attack protesters. Okay, now, once there was a free reign of thuggery in town, other criminal elements took advantage, including political interest, including ex-convicts who wanted to bail out their colleagues, who wanted to free their colleagues, and the country is in trouble today.
Okay.
So we must now go back to the drawing table. How do we manage crisis?
Okay. And
how do we reduce riots?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
These are the issues.
Those are the issues. Very, very well said. But I just want to dial back based on a couple of things you've said. Number one, you said there's a coroner inquest law on ground in Lagos. And
yes, in Lagos State. And since 2007.
Since 2007. One would have thought that the Attorney General of the state will have said, let's invoke that law. But now they're having a Lagos, it's happening at the Lagos Court of Arbitration in Lekki. They're having an inquest, a judicial panel, into the incident at Lekki. So I want to make sense of what is happening. Is it that we don't know the laws to put in place and have a coroner inquest into what happened, and now we are not having a judicial panel? Secondly, I remember another incident that happened in 2003. You were part of it because you were the lawyer that took the case to court. As regards protests, tear gas used and the likes, and the candidate of a certain political party then came out, and we all got the all clear that the police, you don't need to get permission from the police before you go on a protest. But juxtapose that with what happened on the streets, and even allegations that at some point, in the bid of keeping peace, police attacked some people. What sense do you make of all of this?
No, our problem is that our governments have no faith, no fidelity in the law, in the rule of law. Once a judgment of a court has been delivered, Section 287 of the Constitution provides that that judgment shall be obeyed by all authorities and persons in the country. Yes, you are right. In fact, it was General Muhammadu Buhari as it then was. that led the leaders of the AMPP to brief us to challenge police permit for rallies because they had a rally in Kano on the 22nd of May, 2003, under the Olusegun Obasanjo administration. The rally was violently dispersed. People were tear gassed. In fact, one of the leaders couldn't survive the trauma because he was asthmatic. Now, what happens thereafter? The police appealed. We went to court. We won the case in 2006. The police appealed. We won the appeal in 2008. We then went to the authorities. I don't want to be accused of having allowed people to have unrestricted freedom. Therefore, can we have places in all the state capitals in the country designated for rallies? Just like Hyde Park in London, you can abuse a hell out of the Prime Minister, at the Hyde Park. But here, we had Gani Fawehinmi Park in Ojota, where we had the anti-Jonathan administration's protest in 2012. In Abuja, the Unity Fountain used to host Bring Back Our Guest campaigners and all that. But what happened? The fountain, the Unity Fountain has been fenced off so that nobody can go there to protest. In Lagos, Gani Fawehinmi Park has been fenced so nobody can go there to protest. So we must now agree. How do we allow citizens? In the National Assembly, there is a large lawn to accommodate those who may come with their petitions, who may want to protest. You cannot enter the National Assembly today. So, the National Assembly complex. So they make it impossible for us. You cannot protest. Meanwhile, they say you have your right to protest. As if that was not enough. You hire thugs in broad daylight to go and harass and kill protesters. You hire the army or you deploy the army to go and attack civilians. Under Section 217 of the Constitution, the army can only come into crisis in town if there is an insurrection and the police cannot contain it. The president of the country will give the order, Section 217 of the Constitution. This time around, it is very clear, the president never authorized anybody to shoot, to go and attack protesters. And by the way, I've been taking part in protests for 42 years, since my undergraduate days in Ife. There was no protest that the police wanted to stop, that they couldn't stop by the use of tear gas. You'll be surprised to know that many of our police commands do not have a canister of tear gas. I don't know why people can run their own system aground completely. No rubber bullet, no water cannon. How do you police a country without the management of crowd control? It's basic when you are training police men and women. And by the way, in the Second Republic, we had the mobile unit, MOPOL, established. What has happened to that unit? So, and that's why you now have all manners of units. SAS, all manner, anti-cortis, a unit, all manners. So, because the MOPO people are otherwise engaged. So we must now find out, can we persuade the government to respect the right of Nigeria? By the way, I forgot to let you know this. Section 94, based on the judgment that Nigerians can protest, Section 94 of the Electoral Act was amended in 2015, March 27, 2015. And it provides that during protests, the police shall provide adequate security, so as to prevent so-called hoodlums from hijacking protests. This time around, the young people were not protected, as if that was not enough. What happened? You had thugs hired to attack them. And when that did not stop them, the army was moved there. And that is what is going on, which has caused this unfortunate
Well, Mr. Falana, you said a lot, but I hope you are also aware that the federal government of Nigeria, in their response, has also been saying that there's a lot of fake news out there. And in paragraph 4 of the statement by ASCAP, the group that you lead, there was a reference to the social media. I would like you to comment on that, because many of these allegations, the federal government insists, is nothing but fake news. Even Asiwaju Bola Ahmed Tinubu, when he came out and he visited the governor of Lagos State, he also talked about fake news. And then in paragraph 9 of that statement by ASCAP, the group talks about there is no need to replace state terrorism with individual terrorism. But what we saw over the weekend is that individual terrorism has overtaken state terrorism, as it were. What do you also say about that, with people looting people's homes, destroying private assets, and yet claiming that they are expressing their anger and objection to how Nigeria is run?
Well, in that same statement, we actually condemned all forms of violence. We condemn violence in all its ramifications. And that was why we're pleading with Nigerians. Don't replace state terrorism with individual terrorism, you know. Let us embrace the rule of law. Give us time to get to the root of this criminality. We are going to expose those who kill our young ones. We are going to expose those who kill soldiers, those who kill policemen, and indeed, those who kill other Nigerians. And that is the only way you can run a democratic society. With respect to the statements credited to all authorities in Nigeria, you know, it can be so funny to say, oh, hoodlums have hijacked protests. For goodness sake, who created hoodlums? Who created hoodlums? During elections, area boys are called thugs, recruited by politicians, armed to the teeth, drugged. And after the election, they are dumped. They now turn the weapons against the people. Some of them get engaged in armed robbery. I'm sure you know about the Offa robbery a couple, 3 years ago. Those who went to rob in Offa, it doesn't happen anywhere in the world, are political thugs. And what happened? They say, no, and we are not robbers, we are political thugs. After that, a heinous crime, where 33 people, including 9 policemen and a pregnant woman, were killed. The boys went to hide in the government lodge. I've never heard that anywhere in the world. Now, when you use these boys during election, they are called thugs. Meanwhile, Section 227 of the Constitution has prohibited thuggery in the country. The Electoral Act has criminalized thuggery, but no thug is arrested in our country. On the contrary, politicians recruit them. It was only during riot that we call them hoodlums, but they are thugs during election. On other occasions, they are area boys. But what this has, you know, what we are all challenged now, because nobody is safe in our country. Nobody. We are all challenged because look at the way policemen were brutalized, who are serving the country. So there's nobody that can support the gory scenes that we have witnessed in the social media. But for government, we just have to, the government has to be more proactive. Having regards to our experience in the past, when there was no social media, I've told you what happened in 1971 in Ibadan, in 1978 in Lagos, in 1986 in Zaria. It's not about social media. It is that all over the world, the extrajudicial killing, premeditated murder by the state is taken very seriously. You saw that in America recently. In Kenya, a Nigerian was killed 2 years ago. The parents came to me. I couldn't access the court in Kenya. You know, the boy was an undergraduate, just like Nigeria. The police saw him on the highway, you know, driving a car, and they wanted to take bribe from him. He was killed. He was taken to the station and got tortured to death. The parents came to me and said, don't worry. I have just contacted a human rights lawyer in Kenya, you know, who had just written to the government, you know, because we wrote to the government from here. There was no response. So the lawyer is going to court next week, you know. So this is what is going on all over the world. So Nigeria cannot be an exception. But for those who are talking of hijacking by hoodlums, because there's no way you can prevent revolt or riots. but it is the ability of a state, of a government, to contain and reduce the damage that may occur that marks you out as a civilized government. If you have no tear gas to disperse a crowd, young boys and girls who were not armed, just a tumultuous crowd, then you can't say you are a modern state, or that your state, or that they say that Lagos is working. If you do not have effective fire brigade service, and you say, oh yeah, we've been told some were burned. How dare you to stop a fire brigade vehicle from moving, to stop fire from killing people and destroying properties? Ruben, in 1980, the net, a 32-story building on Marina, went on fire. We didn't have the means to quench the fire until fire on its own. And that was how it was stopped. That is what has happened. A stone's throw from net building, MPA building. And I was telling my wife, my dear, this happened 40 years ago. That means we have not learned anything. Yet, between Broad Street and Marina, you have the highest number of high-rise buildings in Nigeria. So what have we done as a government to protect them? So the point I'm making therefore is this. Yes, those who, because we must also, in looking at what happened, you must look at possible political, angle to the destruction. You must look at the class character. You can see the ordinary people. They went to look for COVID-19 palliatives. And nobody can explain the hoarding of such items meant for the poor, not bought by the government, but bought from money contributed by people in the private sector to help the poor. Other countries are giving cash transfer. America, the bastion of capitalism, they're just trying to conclude arrangement to send money to people, all vulnerable people in America. They did that the last time. This one is going to be about 2.3 trillion. But what do we get? So that the government must also be very careful that you don't provoke the people to violence. And those are the lessons we have to learn. While we are condemning violence, let us see how we can prevent reoccurrence of such violent disruption of the peace of the country.
Thank you, sir. I'd like your thoughts on the discovery in warehouses across the country of COVID-19 palliatives. In view of the fact that you'll recall about a month ago, the ICPC announced that they found 2.67 billion naira for the Nigerian school feeding program stashed in private bank accounts. What kind of charges can be brought against those found in connection with this looting, this different form of looting? It's almost like a crime against humanity. Just like some public officers have diverted money meant for providing palliatives for people who have been displaced in their homes, internally displaced people. I mean, you ask yourself, what level of stealing is this? And so this is why we are worried that we just have the ruling class, members of the ruling class in Nigeria will have to have a serious rethink that there are certain areas you must not get to. In looting the treasury of a country, there are areas you must not get to. And appeal, and again, I want to appeal here for warehouses that has not been touched. If palliatives have been stored, I'm going to appeal to all the state governments in Nigeria to emulate the example of the Sokoto state government, that simply, in view of this challenge, please go and distribute all the palliatives. How can a government, how can you hoard Indomie? I mean, it's intolerable. It's provocative. And so our government will have to apologize to the Nigerian people. That you see the crowd in Jos, for goodness sake. I was worried. How are we going to avoid stampede? And stampede has happened in some places. Lives have been lost needlessly. But let me just say something. While I sympathize with those who have lost goods, while I sympathize with families
that have lost their loved ones. We must make a case out of what has happened. And I want to say this. And I'm talking about our law, the development of our law. Those who have lost goods, those who have lost properties that were not insured, should put sentiments apart. Don't say because the government in Abuja, it's our government, it's our party that is ruling the country. No. The law has left that state. Every Nigerian is entitled to protection of his or her life and property. That's the law. Once, through negligence, through lack of proper policing, you lose your properties, the government must pay. I'm not talking of humanitarian assistance. As a matter of law, if anybody dies in the process, the family members have the right to make a claim. And we have cases where this has been decided by our courts. So let nobody in Abuja say, oh, this is, these properties were destroyed by hoodlum. It will never happen again. No. You have a duty to compensate those who have lost their properties. You have a duty to compensate those who have lost their breadwinners or potential breadwinners. That is the position of the law. So that next time, the government will have to take measures to prevent this kind of unfortunate tragic situation.
Okay, so real quickly, I mean, you might want to react to this after I ask the bulk of it. Some people say it's an act of God. Can you count as an act of God? And secondly, I want you to speak
No, this is not an act of God. This is due to the negligence of the government. It's not an act of God. Because every government in the world knows there may be a riot. There's a riot post-election violence going on in Conakry.
Let me quickly put
So you're in Guinea. So you can't say that we are not going to deal with it. And so that's why a government exists, to defend all of us, to protect our life and property.
Okay, let me quickly deal with this. Opportunists taking over this situation to push very rabid tribal sentiments and fault lines. What's your take on all of that?
Very, very dangerous. And I want to say here, we're going to send a report to the Lagos State government of the roles played by young men and women, a few of them, that douse detention. Otherwise, there will be a very serious ethnic backlash. Because even when the protest was going on, again, this is the language of the government. You try to, promote divide et impera tactics, divide and rule. Oh, some governors, oh no, this is an affair of the South. Oh, we don't want SARS to be abolished. We like SARS in our area. Oh, these are some, where is this girl in Northerner joining Southerners? Police brutality is the same all over the place. And it's worse. It's worse where people are not well educated. And so it's a general phenomenon in the country. And from what you have seen, the young men and women who protested did it all over the country. You have protests all over the states, in Adamawa, in Kano, in Kogi, in Kaduna, Ekiti, Anambra, South, everywhere. And so that means, with respect to police brutality, the young people in Nigeria are saying enough is enough. With respect to the palliatives, that is the class character of it. We must all look at. In Jos, where people have fought and where people have been killed on religious or ethnic ground, this time around they were united. Poverty united them. And so that crowd, made up of indigenes, others who are not from Plateau State, Christians and Muslim and traditional worshippers. So that means we now have to, the government has to learn from the people. I mean, there was one fellow who almost caused a problem in Lagos. From nowhere. He didn't know about any protest going on in Nigeria. Staying in the comfort of the West. Tried to say, oh, go and be burning property. And that was a very dangerous situation. Some of us had to contact some friends. Can you tell this fellow not to cause problem for the country? Of course, he later withdrew the nonsensical statement. Of course, there were young men and women that moved out to neighborhoods to plead with them. Well, let us not destroy the country.
On that note, Thank you very much, Femi Falana, SAN, for joining us this morning on The Morning Show. Thank you very much indeed for your insights. We'll